I'm 53 years old, and for most of my life, I believed love had a time limit. Like it was something meant for the young, wild, and impatient, full of fire, but not built to last. It was the kind of idea I had for years, love that burned bright, but flickered out too soon. I had a husband once. We were comfortable, not passionate, the sort of comfort that wrapped us in familiarity but never set our hearts on fire. We went through the motions, we raised a family, we kept up with the bills, and we did what we were supposed to. And after the divorce, I just settled into my quiet routines, gardening, reading, drinking my tea in silence. I found a certain solace in the repetition, in the peace that came with knowing what to expect each day. I thought peace was all I needed. It was enough. I could sit in my little garden with the sun on my face, my books in hand, and feel fulfilled. But something happened that challenged everything I thought I knew about connection, about myself, and about what it means to feel truly seen. I never thought something like this could happen to me. At this point in life, I was too old for new surprises, too grounded in my own comfortable solitude. Please don't make the same mistake I did the day started like any other quiet spring morning. I was out in the garden by 8 a.m., wearing my straw hat and thick gloves, kneeling beside my tomato beds. The sun had just risen high enough to warm my back, and the scent of damp earth and budding flowers wrapped around me like an old friend. It was a peaceful moment, one I could icily lose myself in. I was humming, something from the 70s, probably, Fleetwood Mac, and thinking about how much more planting I had to get done before the afternoon heat settled in. The work, though simple, brought me a kind of deep satisfaction. It was slow, steady, predictable. That's when I heard footsteps behind the fence. "Hey, Miss Callahan," a voice called out. It was soft, but low enough to startle me from my thoughts. I turned and smiled, brushing some dirt off my knees. "Eli, is that you?" I asked, recognizing the voice before I saw him. He stepped around the gate, tall and lanky with that mop of chestnut hair falling in his eyes. 18, maybe 19 now, he had his father's eyes, but his mother's easy smile. I had watched him grow up next door, from a shy little boy kicking soccer balls into my yard to the confident teen he'd become yet, he said, grinning. "Mom said you might need help out here. I've got a few hours before work if you want an extra set of hands." Truthfully, I did need help. My lower back had been sending me warnings for weeks, and the thought of lifting more soil bags made me wince, but I hesitated. I didn't like bothering people, especially not kids his age. "I thought I couldn't ask you to do that," I said, waving him off with a dusty glove. He shrugged. "You didn't." I offered him a smile that I hoped was convincing, but it didn't matter. He was already stepping through the gate, pulling off his sweatshirt and revealing a fitted t-shirt beneath it, thin but strong arms already smeared with smudges from who knows what. Before I could argue further, he was hoisting a bag of mulch like it weighed nothing. "Where do you want this?" he asked. I smiled, shook my head, and pointed to the flower bed near the back fence. Over there. For the next hour, we worked side by side in a rhythm that felt strangely natural. He asked questions about the different herbs I was growing, whether I liked living alone, if I ever got bored. I asked about his job at the hardware store, what he planned to do after graduation, and whether he still played guitar like I remembered. He laughed at that, barely. "I mostly mess around on it now," he said. Sometimes just to think. That struck something in me, how he said it. Like music had become less about impressing girls and more about making sense of things. I understood. That we took a break under the shade of the old pear tree. I poured us lemonade, and he sprawled out in the grass while I sat on the wooden bench. "I like it here," he said, looking around. "It's quiet. Peaceful it is," I agreed. "Though some days it gets a little too quiet." He looked up at me then, not with pity, but with something else. Curiosity maybe, or understanding. It caught me off guard. "You ever think about doing something different?" he asked. "Like just getting away from all this for a while?" I blinked, caught between surprise and some vague ache that his question stirred at my age. He chuckled. "You're not that old," he said. "Says the boy with knees that don't crack when he stands up." He grinned, then went quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the branches above us, scattering light across his face. "I don't know," he said, voice softer now. "I just think people stop chasing what they want way too early. My mom, she's kind of like that. Always tired, always doing for others. But I think she wants more." I looked at him closely. "And what about you, Eli? Do you know what you want?" He hesitated. Then, with a steadiness that surprised me, he turned to me and said, "Sometimes, and sometimes I don't even know if I'm allowed to want it." I didn't know how to respond to that at first. There was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before, like something had cracked open between us. I felt the edge of it resting against me. Warm and uncertain, wanting something doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, I finally said. It just means you're still alive. His eyes met mine. They didn't flinch for the rest of the afternoon. We didn't speak about it again. But something had shifted in the way he moved closer when he handed me tools. In the way our hands brushed, when we both reached for the same trowel. In the quiet glances that lingered just a beat too long. By the time the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft lavender, I thanked him for his help and walked him to the gate. He stopped just before stepping through and looked back at me. "I'm serious, Ms. Callahan." He said yes. I asked, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. His lips parted like he was about to say something, but then just as quickly, he shook his head and gave a small smile. "Nothing. I'll see you tomorrow." I nodded slowly. "Tomorrow's fine." He walked off and I stood there, hands still covered in dirt, heart quietly pounding in my chest. What was I feeling? Curiosity? Guilt? Excitement? I wasn't sure, but I knew something had changed in the air, in him, and in me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the windows cracked open, the soft chirp of crickets drifting in along with the scent of the lavender I'd planted beneath the sill. Normally, those small comforts would lull me into a gentle sleep, but not this time. My mind kept circling back to Eli. His voice, the way he looked at me, the things he didn't say. It wasn't just the garden work or his help that lingered in my thoughts. It was that moment under the pear tree. That strange current in his voice when he spoke about wanting things, but not knowing if he was allowed to. There was something so raw about it, so familiar. When I was his age, I used to feel everything so deeply. I remember looking at the world and wanting so much freedom, passion, understanding. But I was always so careful not to step too far outside what was expected of me: marriage, a stable home, routines. I followed the rules. And yet somewhere along the line, I stopped asking myself what I wanted. Maybe Eli's words echoed because they reminded me of that old silence I'd buried. The next morning, he was back. I hadn't asked him to come. I didn't expect him to. But there he was, standing at the garden gate in the same work boots, holding 2 mugs of coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Good morning," he said, smiling, handing me one of the mugs. Thought I'd beat the heat. I took the mug, still warm in my hands, and tried not to look as surprised as I felt. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." We worked in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that feels aware. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like we were both trying to keep the peace we'd found the day before without waking whatever tension had started to form beneath it. Around mid-morning, I pulled off my gloves and sat down on the edge of the raised bed, brushing a strand of hair away from my damp forehead. Eli sat next to me, a little closer than yesterday. His arm brushed mine. "I didn't pull away. You always been into gardening?" he asked, picking up a small spade and turning it over in his hands. I nodded. "Since I was a girl, my grandmother had this wild patch of land behind her house. She called it her sanctuary. It was the only place where I ever saw her laugh." "That's what this feels like," he said, glancing around. "A sanctuary." I looked at him. He wasn't just being polite. He meant it. "Most people think it's boring," I said. "They don't know what they're talking about." He leaned back on his elbows and let out a breath, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. There was something so open about him in that moment. Not boyish, not guarded, just present. Then, after a moment, he turned his head toward me. "Can I ask you something personal?" He sat and he hesitated but nodded. "Have you ever felt like you were meant for something more, but everyone around you just kind of expected you to stay where you are?" The question struck deeper than I expected. I didn't answer right away. I watched a butterfly land gently on the tip of a daisy and flutter off before speaking. "All the time," I said. "It's one of the loneliest feelings in the world." He looked down, his fingers brushing over a patch of soil between us. "Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for something to happen," he said. "But I don't know what, or if it ever will." I turned toward him, then really turned. And for the first time, I saw him not as my neighbor's son, not as a kid who used to chase his soccer ball into my yard, but as someone quietly wrestling with the same longing I thought only older people carried. "I used to think that too," I said, "and then one day I realized if I kept waiting, I'd miss it all. Whatever it was." He nodded slowly. His eyes locked on mine. We didn't move for a long moment. And then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something that took the breath Out of my chest, I don't think it's the world I'm waiting on, Miss Callahan. I think it's you. Everything inside me went still. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the warmth rising in my chest, my neck. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't even decide what I felt yet. Shock, flattery, a strange thrill, but what I did feel, undeniably, was that nothing between us would be the same after this. I didn't respond, not right away. Instead, I stood and walked slowly to the far end of the garden, pretending to check the soil around my marigolds. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the leaves, but I didn't look back at him. I needed a moment, maybe two. What was I supposed to say to that? I think it's you. That sentence had burrowed itself beneath my skin, gentle and unsettling all at once. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't heard it, to go back to the safe rhythm we'd had the day before. But another part, the quieter, part of me, felt strangely alive when I finally turned around. Eli was still sitting there on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, head low. His confidence from earlier had melted into nervous anticipation. He looked like a boy again, unsure if he'd said too much. I walked back over, sat beside him. Eli, I said, and my voice came out softer than I intended. I don't know what to say. He gave a half smile without looking at me. You don't have to say anything. We sat in silence for a while. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the tall grass at the edge of the fence. I watched a robin hop through the dirt, cocking its head curiously. When I finally spoke again, it wasn't with an answer. It was with honesty. Do you know how long it's been since someone really saw me? I asked. Eli looked up then, his eyes searching mine. I'm not talking about polite smiles or neighbors waving from across the street. I mean, really saw me as someone who still feels, still aches, still wants. He nodded once. That's exactly how I see you. His voice didn't carry a hint of hesitation. And maybe that's what scared me. Not his youth, not the impropriety, but how certain he seemed and how uncertain I suddenly was. I need time, I said quietly. He didn't protest, just gave a small nod and stood. I understand. As he walked toward the gate, I felt something tug inside me. A fear, not of him, but of what I might be closing myself off from. And just before he stepped out, I called out, "Come by tomorrow. Same time." He smiled, relief flickering across his face. I will. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the stars blink to life above the dark silhouette of the trees. I thought of Eli's eyes, how sincere they had looked. And I thought about my reflection in the window pane, older, softer, but still me. The next morning, he came again, this time with a small brown paper bag. "What's this?" I asked as I took it. He shrugged. "Just something I thought you might like." Inside was a tiny notebook. The cover was plain, worn, the pages untouched. "I remembered you said you used to write," he said. I thought maybe you could again. I didn't even remember telling him that. It must have been something I tossed out in passing, but he had caught it, held on to it. That kind of attention, it undid something in me. We didn't do much gardening that day. Instead, we sat under the pear tree again, knees touching now, arms brushing without pulling away. I read to him from the first few lines I scribbled in the notebook. He listened like every word mattered, and somewhere in that quiet afternoon, I realized the boundaries I had always lived by were starting to dissolve. Not recklessly, not foolishly, but naturally, like soil giving way to new roots. At one point, he reached for my hand, just lightly, a touch that asked permission without needing to be spoken, and I let him. I didn't pull away, didn't feel shame. I felt seen, heard, known. Later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light through the branches, he turned to me and asked, "Why did you call me back?" I looked down at our hands, then at his face. "Because something inside me shifted," I said. "And I don't want to ignore it anymore." His thumb brushed gently across my knuckle, and the look he gave me was tender, not possessive, respectful. Present. No more words were needed. In the stillness of that golden hour, I realized that life doesn't always unfold according to expectation or age or rules we never agreed to. Sometimes it just unfolds, and all we can do is lean into it with honesty, care, and the courage to feel again. The following days blurred into one another, filled with slow mornings, laughter in the garden, and long, unhurried conversations under the pear tree. Eli and I never rushed anything. We didn't have to. There was something sacred in the stillness we created together. It felt like the rest of the world had quietly stepped aside, letting us exist in our own small hidden corner. One afternoon, he brought over a portable speaker and played old vinyl transfers from his phone, songs I hadn't heard in decades. Cat Stevens, Joni Mitchell, even a little Carole King. We danced barefoot in the grass. The hose forgotten, dirt still streaking my arms. I hadn't felt that carefree in years, maybe decades, but life, of course, has a way of creeping back in. It happened during a visit from his mother. She popped her head over the fence while I was trimming lavender by the gate. "Eli here?" she asked, casual as ever. I shook my head, heart thudding for reasons I couldn't fully explain. "No? Not yet," she smiled warmly. "That boy always has a reason to wander over here lately." I laughed nervously, pretending not to read between the lines, but her gaze lingered for a second longer than usual before she turned and disappeared behind the fence later. When Eli arrived, I mentioned it, not accusingly, just cautiously. He looked thoughtful. "She suspects something." "Not sure," I said. "But maybe we should what?" he asked gently. "Stop talking. Stop feeling. Go back to pretending." His voice wasn't harsh, but it carried something close to pain. I sat down on the bench, the one where we had shared so many quiet moments, and took a deep breath, knowing that our journey, whatever it was, could never be the same again.